Reed Holston's field stretched before him, rows of early corn barely breaking the hard Nebraska soil, half planted like everything else in his life since the war. The late spring wind carried the scent of coming rain, of earth turning over, of life stubbornly continuing despite his indifference to it. It was the silence that drew him to town that day, not the silence of his empty home, which had become as familiar as his own heartbeat, but the strange silence that fell over the crowded square as the auctioneer dragged her onto the platform. An Apache woman, the last lot of the day, stood with eyes fixed on the horizon as if the jeering crowd didn't exist. Her dark hair had been roughly cut, her traditional dress replaced with a threadbare mission gown, but nothing had diminished the dignity in her bearing. "No takers at $5? The auctioneer's voice cracked with frustration. "Then she goes free with a whiskey purchase." "Government wants these savages placed with proper Christian homes." Reed's tobacco pouch hit the auctioneer's table before he'd fully formed the thought of what he was doing. Reed Holston's day began before dawn, as it had for 5 years since returning from war. Nebraska spring brought the smell of fresh earth as he worked his fields alone, speaking only to direct his plow horse. "Easy, Samson," he murmured, the words startling in the morning quiet. The farmhouse stood half-painted. He'd finished the front that faced the road, but left the back untouched, seeing no point in completing work only he would notice. Like the cradle in the north bedroom, abandoned mid-creation when the letter came telling him Sarah was gone. Reed adjusted his hat against the rising sun and continued the steady rhythm of spring planting. The soil turned over in neat furrows, dark and promising. A good year, maybe, though he'd thought that before. Whether crops thrived or failed made little difference to him now. It was merely the pattern of existence, a reason to rise each morning. By midday, the broken wagon wheel couldn't be ignored any longer. Reed hitched Samson and headed toward town, a journey he made as rarely as possible. Cottonwood Springs had doubled in size since the war, prospectors and settlers flooding west with dreams of fresh starts. Reed had no such illusions. In town, he kept interactions brief, nodding curtly to acquaintances. Emma Wilson approached as he arranged for the wheel repair. "Mr. Holston," she said. Her widow's black faded to gray like his memories. "We missed you at the social." "Been busy," he answered, not meeting her eyes. Emma's gentle persistence irritated him. Her hints about eligible daughters, her casseroles left on his porch, her refusal to let him disappear completely. She'd been Sarah's friend, which made her harder to dismiss. "Spring planting," he added when her silence demanded more. "Always is," she replied, with a knowing smile, before mercifully moving on. The repair would take 2 hours. Reed headed toward the general store, but paused at the sound of a crowd gathering in the square. A new sign announced, "Public auction today. Government-certified labor." He intended to pass by, but the wagon wheel had ensured he was trapped in town. The crowd parted slightly, giving him an unwanted view of the proceedings. Men bid on captured Native Americans, mostly Apache and Comanche, being sold as indentured servants, with government certificates making the transaction appear legal. "Final lot of the day, gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice carried across the square. Apache female, approximately 25 years of age, mission-educated, government-certified indenture papers included. The woman stumbled as she was pushed onto the platform, recovering her balance with a grace that belied her circumstances. Unlike the others sold before her, she made no sound, her silence more powerful than any protest. Blood trickled from her bare foot onto the rough wood platform. No one seemed to notice or care. When no one bid, the auctioneer's frustration showed in his reddening face. "No takers at $5. Then she goes free with a whiskey purchase." Government wants these savages placed with proper Christian homes. Something in her dignified silence reminded Reed of Sarah facing childbirth alone, another woman abandoned by circumstances. The woman's eyes remained fixed on the horizon, as if looking beyond this moment to something only she could see. Reed's tobacco pouch hit the auctioneer's table before he'd fully formed the thought of what he was doing. A season's worth of comfort traded for what? He couldn't say. The crowd turned, shocked to see the reclusive widower involving himself. The auctioneer, eager for any sale, quickly handed over the certificate of indenture. From the hotel porch, Indian Agent Cook watched, making note of the transaction in a small leather book. His eyes, cold as a winter creek, met Reed's briefly before he turned away. Reed felt the weight of what he'd done settling over him like a yoke. He'd broken his own rule: stay uninvolved, stay apart, stay safe. Now he'd have to face the consequences of whatever madness had possessed him in that moment when their eyes met, his and the woman's, and he'd recognized something in her that he thought he'd buried with Sarah. The wagon ride home stretched across miles of silence. Reed's hands gripped the reins too tightly, his mind racing ahead to the farm, to what he'd done. Beside him, the Apache woman sat motionless, her back straight, despite the obvious exhaustion in the shadows beneath her eyes. She'd made no resistance when he'd led her from the auction block, had climbed into the wagon without assistance. Only the slight trembling of her hands betrayed her uncertainty. Reed cleared his throat. "Name's Reed Holston." The words fell awkwardly between them. She gave no indication she'd heard. The farmhouse appeared on the horizon as dusk gathered, a modest two-room structure with a lean-to kitchen and half-finished improvements everywhere the eye could land. Like Reed himself, functional but incomplete. He pulled the wagon to a stop, watching as she took in her surroundings, the barn, the fields, the isolation. Her face revealed nothing, but her shoulders tensed slightly. "You sleep there," Reed said, gesturing toward the house. He searched his memory for Apache phrases learned from scouts during the war. Ni Gostzan, your home. The woman's eyes widened slightly, the first real reaction he'd seen. "I sleep barn," he continued, pointing to himself, then the structure behind them. "Not slave, not wife, safe until—" He gestured vaguely eastward, lacking words to express his meaning. "Until you're strong enough, until it's safe to leave, until you decide." She studied him, gaze direct and unflinching, as if trying to read truth or deception in his features. Finally, she gave a small nod. Reed showed her the house, the stove, the pump, the pantry with its modest supplies. He pointed to the north bedroom, but didn't enter it, then indicated the main room where a pallet could be made. From a trunk, he pulled one of Sarah's old dresses, setting it on the table without comment before retreating. In the barn loft, Reed spread his bedroll, listening to the absolute silence from the house. Had she fled already? He wouldn't blame her. Sleep came fitfully, dreams tangling with memories of Sarah. Morning revealed the Apache woman hadn't fled, but hadn't entered the house either. She'd slept in the covered wagon, refusing the charity that might come with expectations. Reed found her examining his half-finished fields with a farmer's critical eye. Days established a pattern of parallel work. Reed plowing, the woman observing from a distance, then tentatively weeding the kitchen garden. Sarah had started years before. They communicated through gesture and necessity. When Reed left food on the porch step, she left it untouched until he was gone, pride preventing any appearance of dependence. A spring storm brought torrential rain. Reed worked frantically to secure the barn and livestock, soaked to the skin and chilled to the bone by the time he finished. By morning, fever gripped him. For 2 days, he drifted in and out of consciousness, hallucinating Sarah's presence. "Not your time," Sarah whispered in his fever dreams. Not done yet. He woke on the 3rd day to find a cool cloth on his forehead and the scent of unfamiliar herbs steeping in a pot by the fire. The Apache woman knelt beside him, reluctantly tending him with a mixture from plants she'd gathered. She tilted a cup to his lips without meeting his eyes. Their first real communication came through illness. She mimed drinking, he complied. The bitter liquid burned going down, but cleared his head. A foundation of basic trust formed. On the 4th day, when Reed could sit up, she placed a wooden cup on the table between them, sliding it toward him with 2 fingers. "Awanada," she said, the first word she had spoken directly to him. She touched her chest, then the cup, then extended her hand halfway across the table, her name. She had given him her name. Reed stared at her outstretched hand, then slowly extended his own. "Reed," he answered, their fingers nearly touching above the rough-hewn table, the space between them suddenly less vast than it had been moments before. Reed hung the last of the laundry on the line, his fever finally broken after 3 days. Awanada's medicine had saved him. This much he knew. The bitter tea had driven the sickness from his body when it might well have taken him under. He turned to find her watching from the edge of Sarah's old kitchen garden, her dark eyes assessing his recovery. In the weeks since his illness, she'd expanded the plot, adding neat rows of unfamiliar plants alongside the practical vegetables Sarah had favored. "What are these?" Reed asked, gesturing to a patch of slender-stemmed plants with toothed leaves. Awanada approached cautiously, still maintaining the careful distance she kept between them. "Medicine," she said, the word precise, as if practiced. She pointed to his chest. "For lungs." Reed nodded, understanding dawning. The plants she'd used to cure him now growing within reach should they be needed again. Practical, thoughtful even. Throughout the day, Reed felt her eyes on him as he worked, checking for signs of returning weakness. The attention made him uncomfortable. It had been years since anyone had reason to care whether he lived or died. That evening, he gathered tools and lumber from the barn. Near the house, but not too near, he began constructing a small shelter, a lean-to with walls and a door she could bar from inside. Awanada watched from a distance, puzzlement evident in her slight frown. "For you," Reed explained, gesturing between her and the structure. "Your own place, your choice." Understanding flickered across her features, followed by something that might have been gratitude, quickly masked. As the shelter took shape, she gradually approached, eventually holding boards in place while he hammered, their first voluntary cooperation. By dusk, the small structure stood complete but for the door. Reed fashioned a simple wooden bar that could be dropped into place from inside, protection against intruders. Against him, though he didn't say it aloud. The message was clear. Her space, her choice. That night, Awanada moved her few possessions into the shelter. Reed watched from the porch as she settled in, noting how she positioned herself to view both the main house and the road approaching the farm, always aware, always ready. The next morning, he found a small bundle of herbs outside his door, plants to help with the lingering congestion in his chest. The first gift freely given between them. Spring planting continued, their work finding a natural rhythm. Reed showed her the fields he'd prepared. She indicated where certain crops might thrive based on her knowledge of soil and sun. They began developing a language of necessity. English words, Apache phrases, and gestures forming a bridge between their worlds. The sound of an approaching wagon broke their tentative peace. Emma Wilson's buggy appeared on the road, and Reed tensed, unsure how to explain Awanada's presence. Before he could form a plan, Awanada slipped into the role of servant, keeping her eyes down and her posture submissive as Emma approached. "Mr. Holston," Emma called, climbing down with a covered basket. "Thought you might need some proper food after your illness. Word travels, you know." Reed accepted the basket with awkward thanks, painfully aware of Awanada retreating toward her shelter. Emma's eyes missed nothing: the separate shelter, the expanded garden, the untouched portion of food set aside on the porch with care. Her expression remained neutral, but Reed recognized the calculation behind her gaze. "Your help seems settled," Emma said carefully, testing the waters. "She has her own space," Reed replied, the words carrying more meaning than their simplicity suggested. Emma nodded slowly. "As we all should." She glanced again at Awanada's shelter. "If you need anything, either of you, my door is open." After Emma departed, Reed found Awanada in the garden, her shoulders relaxed once more. "Friend?" she asked, gesturing toward the disappearing buggy. "Sarah's friend," Reed corrected, the name still difficult to speak. "Maybe ours now." That evening, Sheriff Dawson rode up, ostensibly checking on Reed after hearing he was ill. His eyes lingered on Awanada, who had retreated to her shelter at the first sound of hoofbeats. "Keeping company now, Holston?" Dawson asked, his casual cruelty revealing the town's awareness of their arrangement. "Unusual choice." Reed's hand strayed toward his belt knife. "My business." "Maybe." Dawson adjusted his hat. "Maybe not. Indian Agent Cook is rounding up strays for the new reservation. Paying good money for information." After Dawson left, Reed cleaned his rifle within Awanada's sight, a silent promise of protection that she acknowledged with a nod. Summer brought brutal heat, turning the Nebraska plains into a shimmering mirage of gold and dust. Working the fields, Reed wiped sweat from his brow and watched Awanada kneel in her expanding garden, seemingly unbothered by the sun that drove most indoors by midday. "Ho!" he said, holding up the tool he used between corn rows. "Ho!" she repeated, the English word precise on her tongue. She pointed to a wooden digging stick of her own making. "Say-a." Reed attempted the Apache word, mangling it thoroughly. Her lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Say-a," he tried again, closer this time. It had become their daily ritual, this exchange of words, building a bridge between worlds. Reed offered English terms for tools, crops, weather. Awanada corrected his Apache pronunciation with rare, fleeting smiles. They developed a pidgin language of necessity, part English, part Apache, part gesture. Their evening pattern had evolved too. Separate meals gave way to shared fire, then tentative conversation. Reed learned Awanada was taken to a mission school as a child, where she'd learned English and Spanish before returning to her people as a young woman. 7 years with black robes, she explained, using the Apache term for priests. Then back to mountains. Her hand sketched the shape of peaks against the darkening sky. "You speak good English," Reed noted. "Read, too. Write some." Pride flickered briefly in her eyes before dimming. "Not help when soldiers come." Reed nodded, understanding what remained unspoken. Education hadn't protected her people from violence, hadn't made the white world see them as human. He shared practical aspects of his past, where he learned carpentry, how to predict weather from cloud patterns, which crops grew best in this soil. He never mentioned Sarah, though Awanada had noticed how he avoided the north bedroom, how his eyes sometimes fixed on things only he could see. The next day brought necessity. They needed supplies, and while Reed could have gone alone, Awanada insisted on accompanying him. They needed to gauge the threat level in town. "You work for me," Reed instructed as they neared Cottonwood Springs. "Room and board, helping with harvest, nothing more." Awanada nodded, already withdrawing behind the blank expression she wore like armor. He'd come to recognize it as protection, not emptiness. In town, whispers followed them. Reed purchased supplies, while Awanada waited with the wagon, wearing a settler woman's bonnet that shadowed her face. Her posture was perfect, her eyes downcast, the very picture of appropriate servitude. "That certificate ain't worth the paper it's printed on," a voice called out. Reed turned to find the auctioneer's assistant approaching, 3 other men trailing behind. "Agent Cook's offering $20 for any Indian not properly registered." The men surrounded the wagon, where Awanada sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap. But Reed saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes tracked each man's position. "She's registered," Reed said, hand moving to his belt knife, "working off her indenture fair and square." The assistant snorted. "Awful generous terms you're offering. Most would get more use out of their investment." Reed stepped forward, but Awanada subtly signaled patience with a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. Before the situation could escalate, Emma Wilson approached, cutting through the crowd with determined steps. "Awanada," she called with familiar warmth, as if they were old friends. "Did you bring those herbs we discussed?" "My rheumatism is acting up something fierce." The men shuffled aside as Emma created a diversion, chatting loudly about recipes and remedies until Reed finished loading supplies. On the tense ride home, they spotted riders heading toward town, bounty hunters known for tracking down escaped slaves now finding new work in Indian retrieval. "Man who spoke," Awanada said, once they were safely distant. "He worked for Agent Cook, sell people, then help catch them again." Reed's jaw tightened. "You knew him?" "He took family from village," she replied, voice flat. "Before auction." The rest of the journey passed in heavy silence. As the farm came into view, Reed noted how Awanada scanned the horizon, the road behind them, the tree line, cataloging escape routes, assessing dangers, always watching, always prepared. That night, Reed showed Awanada how to load and fire his pistol. Her hands were steady, her aim surprisingly accurate. "Not first time," she explained when he raised an eyebrow at her skill. "Father taught before." Before the soldiers. Before her world collapsed. Before she stood on an auction block in Cottonwood Springs. "Tomorrow the rifle," Reed said, cleaning the pistol with practiced movements. "And I'll need to learn how you move so quiet. Never hear you coming." For the first time, Awanada smiled fully, a transformation that caught Reed off guard with its brightness. "Apache way," she said simply. "I teach." They sat in companionable silence until the fire burned low, the shared danger creating a different kind of bond between them. A violent thunderstorm rolled across the plains as night fell, turning afternoon to instant darkness. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, illuminating the farm in stark white flashes before plunging it back into shadow. Rain hammered against the roof like desperate fists, wind howling through every crack and seam. Reed stood in the doorway of the main house, watching as water pooled and churned across the yard. Awanada's shelter, though sturdy, wasn't built for a deluge of this magnitude. Without thinking, He crossed the muddy expanse between them, rain soaking him instantly. "Come inside," he called above the storm, gesturing toward the house. Awanada hesitated, clutching her few possessions to her chest. Lightning cracked overhead, and Reed saw uncertainty flicker across her features. "Just until it passes," he added. After a moment's calculation, she nodded, gathering a small leather pouch that hung from her neck and tucking it securely inside her dress. Whatever it contained, Reed noted, she valued it above all else. Inside, the house felt suddenly smaller with two people. Reed stoked the fire higher, the light casting long shadows across the walls. He offered her Sarah's old shawl from a hook by the door. "Here," he said, holding out the soft wool. Their fingers brushed as she accepted it, and neither pulled away immediately. For a heartbeat, then two, they remained connected by that simple touch, her skin warm against his calloused hand. Reed felt something crack inside his chest, like spring ice breaking on the river, dangerous, unstoppable. He turned away, busying himself with coffee, while Awanada settled by the fire, wringing water from her long hair. The storm rattled the windows, but inside, a different kind of tension built with each passing moment of shared silence. "Your house," Awanada finally said, looking around the main room. Her gaze lingered on the closed door of the north bedroom. "You build?" Reed nodded. "Started before the war. Finished after." "After wife?" The question was gentle, respectful. Reed's movement stilled. 5 years, and he'd barely spoken Sarah's name aloud. Yet something in this night, in the storm's fury, matching what he'd kept locked inside, loosened his tongue. "Sarah," he said, the name emerging rusty with disuse. Her name was Sarah. Awanada nodded, accepting the offering of this small truth. "I was at Gettysburg," Reed continued, the words drawn from some deep well he thought had run dry years ago. "When she died bringing our son into the world, I wasn't here." He sank into a chair, suddenly weary. "I should have been here." Without asking permission, he rose and opened the north bedroom door. Dust motes danced in the air as he lit the lamp, revealing a room frozen in time. A rocking chair with a half-finished quilt. A dresser with a hairbrush still containing a few strands of auburn hair. And in the corner, the cradle. Reed ran his hand along the smooth oak, lovingly shaped but never completed. No slats on one side, no finish applied. "I got the letter 2 weeks after. By then they were both in the ground." Awanada stood in the doorway, observing but not entering this sacred space. "Some days I wish I'd died in Virginia," Reed admitted. "Then some days—" He didn't finish, but his eyes met hers. "I understand," she said simply. She settled on the floor before the main room fire, and after a moment's hesitation, began drawing in the hearth ash with a slender finger. A village nestled against mountains, people moving through daily life. Then figures on horseback approaching. "Soldiers come at dawn," she explained, her English more fluid now, as if the story demanded to be told properly. "Kill many, take others." Her finger erased the village, smudging it into nothingness. "My husband was warrior, strong, kind man." She traced the outline of a tall figure. "Our son, 5 winters." A smaller figure beside the first. "Both killed when I was gathering plants by the river. I heard shots. I saw smoke. I hid." Reed watched her face, the firelight catching the dampness in her eyes that she refused to acknowledge as tears. "They found me next day. Took me first to fort, then to mission, then—" Her hand spread across the ash, obliterating the images. "Traded, sold, traded again, each place worse, then the auction." From within her dress, She withdrew the small leather pouch, handling it with reverence. She opened it just enough for Reed to glimpse seeds, a carved bone whistle, and a lock of black hair tied with sinew. "My son's hair," she said, voice steady, though her fingers trembled. "And seeds from sacred places. My grandmother's grandmother said someday we would need to remember how to grow our plants, how to heal, how to live, when everything else was taken." Reed recognized in her grief a mirror to his own, the physical objects left behind, infused with meaning beyond their simple forms. Sarah's hairbrush, his son's cradle, Awanada's medicine pouch. "They take my family, my freedom," she said in careful English. "This they cannot take." Dawn broke with new understanding between them. As the storm cleared, leaving puddles gleaming in the morning light, Reed stood in the doorway, watching Awanada assess the damage to her shelter. "You can go when it's safe," he said, the words both promise and question. Awanada turned to him, her face open in a way it hadn't been before. "Maybe," she replied. "Maybe not yet." It was the first suggestion she might choose to stay. The farm transformed through their combined efforts as summer deepened. Reed built an irrigation system to channel water from the creek to the fields. Awanada's knowledge of desert farming improved crop yields despite the brutal heat. They worked as partners now, anticipating each other's needs, moving in a dance of efficiency that required few words. Each day, Reed rose before dawn to find Awanada already awake, tending her expanding garden of medicinal plants and vegetables. Each evening, they shared the day's harvest, prepared according to a blend of their traditions. The silences between them had grown comfortable, punctuated by exchanges of knowledge that bridged their different worlds. "Like this," Reed demonstrated, showing Awanada how to sight along his rifle barrel. They stood at the edge of the property, empty cans arranged on fence posts as targets. "Breathe out slow as you squeeze." Awanada adjusted her stance, following his instructions with the same careful attention she gave to everything new. The rifle cracked, and the furthest can flew off its post. "Natural," Reed commented, impressed by her marksmanship. "You've shot before." "Different guns," she replied. "Heavier, this one." She weighed the rifle in her hands. "Balanced better." By the third shot, she was hitting targets with consistent accuracy. Reed watched her methodical approach, the calm focus she brought to the task. In return, she taught him Apache hunting techniques, how to move silently through terrain, how to read subtle signs of animal passage, how to wait with perfect stillness until the right moment. "You breathe too loud," she admonished, demonstrating the shallow, controlled breathing that made her nearly undetectable in the tall grass. "And footsteps too heavy." Reed practiced until he could approach within yards of grazing deer before they sensed his presence. "The irrigation channels," he admitted one evening, studying their flourishing corn. "They're based on what you showed me from your people's desert farming. Never seen crops this strong in drought years." Awanada nodded, pride visible in the set of her shoulders. "Two ways together," she said, "stronger than one alone." News came via Emma Wilson of increased bounties for unregistered Indians. She arrived one afternoon, her normally composed face tight with concern. "Agent Cook has been asking questions about your Indian woman," she reported, accepting a cup of coffee on the porch, "making it known there's $30 now for information leading to the recovery of government property." Reed's jaw tightened. "She's not property." "You and I know that," Emma replied, watching Awanada work in the garden beyond earshot. "But that certificate you got at auction, I've seen others like it." My late husband was an abolitionist who helped escape slaves. I know the signs of corrupt officials using the law for profit." She lowered her voice. "Cook sells these people, then collects bounties when they're recovered. Those who might identify him tend to disappear." The implications hung heavy in the summer air. Reed glanced toward Awanada, finding her watching them with knowing eyes. She missed little. "What can we do?" he asked. "Get legal clarity on her status. My husband had contacts in the territorial office in Council Bluffs. I still write to some of them." The next day, Reed made the journey to the territorial office, leaving Awanada with his pistol and strict instructions to hide if strangers approached. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, explained the legal morass in bureaucratic terms. "Without tribal registration or proof of citizenship, she exists in legal limbo," he concluded, shuffling papers. "The government considers all unregistered Indians to be wards of the state, under jurisdiction of Indian agents like Mr. Cook." "And if someone purchased an indenture contract?" Reed pressed. The clerk's expression turned cynical. "Those certificates, no legal standing unless countersigned by a territorial judge. Without that, anyone could claim jurisdiction. The original seller, the Indian agent, even bounty hunters with the right paperwork." Returning home, Reed found Awanada had sewn hidden pockets into their clothing for emergency supplies and created caches of food and medicine around the property. She'd been preparing for the same inevitable confrontation. That evening, they sat together on the porch steps, watching fireflies rise from the fields as dusk settled. Reed outlined what he'd learned, the precarious legal position they occupied. "We should consider options," he said carefully. "There are communities farther west where—" "No more running," Awanada interrupted, her voice firm. "This is—" She gestured to the farm, the garden, the house. "This is home now." The word hung between them, fragile and powerful. "They will come," Reed warned. "Then we prepare." She reached into her pocket, withdrawing a folded paper. A map, he realized, that she'd carefully drawn, showing the farm, the surrounding countryside, marking caves and ravines where one might hide or defend. Reed studied her face in the fading light, struck by the determination there, the strength. This woman, who had lost everything, had chosen to stand her ground, here, with him. "Together, then," he agreed. Something shifted between them in that moment. Commitment deeper than words. Purpose aligned beyond mere survival. Their hands rested side by side on the porch step, not quite touching, but aligned, like their resolve. Inside the house, the cradle waited in the north bedroom, no longer a monument to grief, but a symbol of possibility, something unfinished that might yet be completed. As summer yielded to fall, the corn stood tall and golden in the fields, heavy with promise. Reed and Awanada worked from dawn until dusk, their bodies moving in natural rhythm through the familiar harvest motions. Their hard labor had transformed not just the land, but themselves. Reed's face had lost its hollow emptiness, while Awanada's watchful wariness had softened into alert calm. They spoke less now, but communicated more, a language of shared glances, small gestures, and occasional touches that conveyed more than words could manage. Reed found himself listening for her footsteps in the garden, the quiet rhythm of her breathing as she worked beside him. Somewhere between winter and spring, silence had transformed from sanctuary to prison. Now, the spaces between their words held comfort rather than emptiness. One evening, Reed approached the well where Awanada drew water for the kitchen. She lifted the heavy bucket with practiced ease, turning to find him standing closer than expected. Their eyes met, held. "Let me," he offered, reaching for the bucket. Their fingers brushed as she relinquished the handle, a brief touch that lingered like heat against his skin. Neither acknowledged the moment, but both felt the shift it represented. That night, a harvest moon rose huge and golden over the plains. Reed brought out Sarah's old violin, unplayed since before the war. Its mournful voice creaked at first, then warmed as he remembered forgotten melodies. Awanada listened from her place by the fire, her face softened in the amber light. When he paused, she began to sing softly in Apache, a melody that twined around his simpler tune, enriching it with something ancient and haunting. "Song of gratitude," she explained when he lowered the violin. "For good harvest, for—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Sanctuary." The word seemed to fill the space between them, acknowledging what they'd built together beyond mere survival. Under the harvest moon, they sat closer than necessary on the porch steps. Awanada placed her hand deliberately beside his, not quite touching. Reed covered it with his own, a question. She turned her palm up to meet his, an answer. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through Reed's chest, a sensation so long forgotten he almost didn't recognize it as happiness. "I never asked," he said quietly, "what you want after this, when winter comes." Awanada's eyes remained on their joined hands. "My people are scattered," she replied. "My home is ashes. Here." She gestured to the farm, to him. "Here I have purpose again." Reed's throat tightened. "You could have purpose anywhere. Your skills, your knowledge." "Purpose not just in work," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "In being seen, being known." The honesty in her words stripped away the last of Reed's defenses. He reached up slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her skin was warm beneath his calloused fingers. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, both rusty with grief and fearful of loss. They separated, surprised by joy neither expected to feel again. "I thought this part of me died with Sarah," Reed confessed. "We do not die all at once," Awanada replied. "Some parts sleep, waiting." The moment hung between them, fragile and precious. Then Awanada tensed, her head turning toward the road. Though Reed heard nothing, he'd learned to trust her senses. "Someone comes," she whispered, withdrawing her hand from his. They moved with practiced efficiency, Awanada retrieving the rifle from inside, while Reed stepped off the porch, positioning himself to meet whoever approached. A rider appeared in the moonlight, Emma Wilson, her horse lathered from hard riding. "Cook knows," she said without preamble, dismounting quickly. "He was in town today with those bounty hunters, asking specific questions about your farm, your routines." Reed glanced at Awanada, seeing her already mentally reviewing their preparations. "There's more," Emma continued, lowering her voice. "He recognized your name from somewhere. The war, he said. Something about medical supplies." The memory surfaced immediately in Reed's mind. A supply sergeant stealing medicines meant for the wounded, selling them to civilians while soldiers died. Reed had reported him, testified at the court-martial. "Cook," he said slowly. "Elias Cook, different uniform then, but the same man." "Then this isn't just business for him," Emma concluded grimly. "It's personal." After Emma departed, with promises to send word of any new developments, Reed found Awanada in the north bedroom, standing before the half-finished cradle. Her fingers traced the smooth oak with reverence. "We should leave," she said, not looking at him. "This is my fight, not yours." "That's not how this works," Reed replied, joining her beside the cradle. Not anymore. Through the night, they reinforced doors and windows, packed emergency supplies, and planned escape routes. Before dawn, Reed completed the task that had waited 5 years, finishing the cradle that had stood as monument to his grief. He added the missing slats, sanded rough edges, and applied the oil finish that brought out the wood's rich grain. Awanada watched from the doorway, understanding the significance of his actions. The cradle was no longer a shrine to the past, but a symbol of possibility. A future neither had dared imagine might exist. Morning revealed fresh tracks in the frost surrounding the farm. They were being watched. Reed completed the cradle in the pale light of dawn, his hands steady despite the danger he knew approached. "They will not find us unprepared," Awanada said, placing her hand over his as he set the cradle in its place. In her eyes, Reed saw not fear, but determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes as Reed watched riders approach along the road, 5 men in silhouette against the white landscape. Sheriff Dawson led the group, followed by 2 deputies and a pair of bounty hunters Reed recognized from town. Behind them rode Indian Agent Cook, his government-issue coat marking him as a man of authority. Reed glanced toward the house where Awanada waited, positioned as they'd planned. Their strategy was clear. She would remain hidden in the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor until they determined Cook's intentions, though both suspected what was coming. Positions, Reed murmured to himself, checking that his rifle was loaded before stepping onto the porch. He kept the weapon casual but ready, barrel pointed downward, but prepared to raise at a moment's notice. The riders stopped in the yard, a semicircle of mounted men facing the house. Frost gathered on the horses' muzzles as they blew steam into the cold air. "Holston," Sheriff Dawson called out, not dismounting. "Got business with you today." "Sheriff," Reed acknowledged, nodding slightly. "What brings you all the way out here in weather like this?" Cook nudged his horse forward, his face tight with barely controlled satisfaction. "Official government business, Mr. Holston. I have papers demanding the return of escaped Apache female to proper authorities." He withdrew an official-looking document from inside his coat. Reed stepped down from the porch, moving closer to examine the paper, but maintaining a careful distance. "No escaped Apache here, just a woman working off her indenture." "Fraudulent document," Cook dismissed with a wave. "These savages are wards of the government, not servants. That piece of paper you bought at auction isn't worth the ink it's printed on." Reed studied the man before him, searching for recognition in his features. The Cook he remembered from the war had been leaner, clean-shaven, instead of sporting the neat beard he wore now. But the eyes were the same, cold, calculating, seeing people as commodities rather than souls. "Still interfering with official business, Sergeant Holston?" Cook asked, a smile spreading across his face. "Still thinking you know better than your superiors? I remember you from Virginia. Self-righteous then, too." "I remember you as well," Reed replied evenly. "Stealing medicine meant for dying boys. Selling it while gangrene took their limbs and infection took their lives." A flash of rage crossed Cook's face before he controlled it. "Ancient history. I'm here in an official capacity now, with full authority to collect all unregistered Indians for placement on the reservation." "Where exactly is this reservation?" Reed asked. "Because word is, those you place have a habit of disappearing." Cook's jaw tightened. "Deputies, search the house. She's here somewhere." The 2 men dismounted, moving toward the porch with hands on their pistols. Reed stepped into their path. "You have no right to enter my home without cause," he stated, raising his rifle slightly, not aiming, but a clear warning. We have every right, Sheriff Dawson countered. Federal jurisdiction supersedes your property rights when it comes to Indian matters. The tension stretched taut between them, ready to snap into violence at the slightest provocation. Then the kitchen door opened, and Awanada emerged with Reed's pistol held steady in her hand. "This is our home," she said clearly, her English perfect and deliberate. "You have no right." Reed felt a surge of pride mixed with fear at her courage. This wasn't their plan, but he recognized the strategic advantage of her appearance, forcing the men to divide their attention between two armed opponents. Cook's face registered shock at her composed demeanor, so at odds with his narrative of savage wards needing government supervision. "Drop the weapon, woman. You're coming with us." "I am a free person," Awanada replied. "I choose to stay here." "Enough talk," Cook snapped, signaling to the bounty hunters. "Take them both. The woman for the reservation, Holston for interfering with government business." What happened next unfolded with startling speed. The bounty hunters drew their weapons, but Awanada fired first, not at the men, but at the ground near their horses. The animals reared in panic, throwing one man from his saddle while the other struggled for control. In the confusion, Reed raised his rifle toward Sheriff Dawson. "Back away, all of you. We've broken no laws." "This isn't over, Holston," Cook snarled, struggling with his frightened mount. "We'll be back with more men." "And we'll be waiting," Reed answered. The confrontation might have ended there, with the men retreating to regroup, had one of the deputies not decided to be a hero. He drew and fired in one motion, the bullet splintering wood beside Reed's head. Reed returned fire instinctively, hitting the man's shoulder. Awanada shot the second deputy's hat cleanly off his head, a warning that stopped him from drawing. What followed was chaos, horses bolting, men shouting, snow kicked up in blinding clouds. Awanada grabbed Reed's arm, pulling him toward the barn where they'd hidden fresh horses already saddled. "They'll return with more men," she said as they mounted. "We need to reach Emma's before the snow covers our tracks." Reed nodded, understanding their prepared escape route. A bullet whistled past as they rode out the back of the barn, Cook's enraged shouts following them into the swirling snow. They rode hard through deepening drifts, taking advantage of the storm to cover their trail. Reed felt warm wetness spreading down his side and realized he'd been hit, not critically, but the bullet had carved a furrow along his ribs. Miles from the farm, as darkness fell, they took shelter in an abandoned mine shaft they'd previously stocked with emergency supplies. Awanada examined Reed's wound by lantern light, her face grim. "Not deep," she assessed, cleaning the injury with practiced hands. "But needs stitching." As she worked, Reed watched her face, the absolute concentration, the gentle efficiency. In this intimate moment, with danger still pursuing them, he felt certainty crystallize within him. "I should have told you to run months ago," he said. "I knew it was dangerous." Awanada's hands paused in their work, her eyes meeting his. "I choose this danger," she answered simply. "I choose you." The lantern cast golden light across her features as she bent to finish bandaging his side. Outside, the storm howled, granting them temporary sanctuary in its fury. "We cannot run forever," Reed said, as she joined him on the blankets they'd spread. "No," she agreed, her shoulder warm against his. "We must face Cook with truth. Show what he does, selling people, then collecting bounties when they're recaptured." Reed nodded, thinking of Emma and her connections to the territorial judge. "We'll need witnesses, documentation." "Emma will help," Awanada said with certainty. They sat in silence, listening to the wind's mournful cry outside their shelter. Despite the danger, despite the wound in his side, Reed felt strangely at peace. The path ahead was clear now, not easy, but clear. He reached for Awanada's hand in the dim light, finding it waiting for his. The blizzard gave them 3 days of natural protection, a white curtain behind which they could move toward Council Bluffs. Emma Wilson met them at a way station 10 miles outside town, her normally calm demeanor tense with urgency. "Cook has men watching the roads," she informed them, helping Reed down from his horse. His wound had begun to fester despite Awanada's care, leaving him feverish and weak. "But the territorial judge is expecting us. I've sent word ahead." Emma's home stood on the outskirts of Council Bluffs, a modest structure with an unexpected feature, a hidden cellar room accessible only through a trapdoor beneath her kitchen table. "My husband's contribution to the Underground Railroad," she explained as she helped them down the narrow stairs. "Now it serves a new purpose." For 2 days, Reed drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams, while Awanada worked to draw the infection from his wound. Emma brought documents, affidavits from others who had witnessed Cook's schemes, financial records showing suspicious patterns of payment between the auctioneer and the Indian agency. "Cook is telling everyone you kidnapped Awanada at gunpoint," Emma reported, placing cool compresses on Reed's forehead. "Says you're a dangerous man with delusions from the war." "Not far wrong," Reed murmured, attempting a weak smile. On the 3rd day, his fever broke. He woke to find Awanada asleep beside him, her hand still resting on his bandaged side. In slumber, the vigilance she maintained even in safety softened, revealing the young woman she must have been before soldiers came to her village. Reed touched her cheek gently, and her eyes opened immediately, alert even in waking. "The fever is gone," she said, placing her palm against his forehead. "Thanks to you," he replied. Their eyes held, a moment of private connection in the midst of danger. Then Emma's footsteps overhead brought them back to present circumstances. "Judge Patterson has agreed to see us tonight," she announced, descending the stairs with fresh clothes for them both. "His clerk is sympathetic to our cause and has arranged a private meeting at his home." They dressed carefully, Reed in borrowed clothes that marked him as a respectable farmer, Awanada in a simple dress that Emma had altered to fit her smaller frame. The disguise was completed with a heavy cloak and bonnet that shadowed her face. Dusk provided additional cover as Emma's wagon carried them through town to a stately home on a quiet street. The judge's clerk ushered them through a side entrance, casting nervous glances toward the street. Judge Thaddeus Patterson was not what Reed expected. A compact man with shrewd eyes and a shock of white hair, he dispensed with formalities and went straight to the evidence Emma had gathered. "Disturbing," he commented, reviewing the documents, "but not entirely surprising. The reservation system is ripe for abuse by unscrupulous agents." He turned his attention to Awanada, studying her with honest curiosity. "Madam, would you share your experience in your own words? I would hear your account directly." Awanada straightened, meeting the judge's gaze with dignity. In clear, precise English, she recounted her capture, the separation from her people, the series of owners before the auction, and finally, her life at Reed's farm. "Mr. Holston never treated me as property," she concluded. "He gave me choice, respect. We built partnership." The slight hesitation before the final word carried meanings beyond what she could express in English. The judge nodded thoughtfully. "And what do you seek now?" "Freedom," she answered simply. "Legal recognition as person, not property or ward. Right to choose my own path." "A fundamental right indeed," the judge murmured. "One that should require no special dispensation." He shuffled through the papers before him. "I believe I can help you, but Cook won't surrender his profitable enterprise easily. He has friends in the territorial government." "We're prepared to testify," Reed stated. "It may not come to that," the judge replied. "Sometimes the mere threat of exposure is enough." Their planning continued late into the night, strategies formed and discarded as they sought the surest path to justice. When they finally returned to Emma's house, exhaustion claimed them both the moment they reached the safety of the hidden room. Morning brought new urgency. Emma burst into the cellar, her face pale. "Cook is here, in town. He's brought those bounty hunters, and they're searching house to house." They had expected this, prepared for it. Yet the reality of Cook's pursuit still sent ice through Reed's veins. Their plan required one more day. One day for the judge to draw up the legal documents that would protect Awanada from Cook's claims. By midday, the search had reached Emma's street. From the narrow cellar window, Reed watched men move from house to house, their methods growing rougher with each failed search. "They'll be here within the hour," he said, turning to find Awanada already gathering their few possessions. "The back route to the judge's house," Emma suggested. "Through the orchards." They were halfway to the judge's residence when a shout went up behind them. One of the bounty hunters had spotted their movement through the bare apple trees. "Run," Reed urged, pushing Awanada ahead, while he turned to face their pursuers, his wound protesting the sudden movement. What followed was a desperate chase through town, their planned route abandoned as they ducked through alleys and yards. They reached the courthouse steps just as Cook and his men rounded the corner, pistols drawn. "Stop right there, Holston!" Cook shouted, his voice carrying across the square. "That Indian is government property." The courthouse doors opened, and Judge Patterson emerged, flanked by two federal marshals. "Actually, Mr. Cook, I have evidence suggesting otherwise." The confrontation that followed became the talk of Council Bluffs for years afterward. As townspeople gathered, drawn by the commotion, Judge Patterson publicly outlined the evidence against Cook: the fraudulent indenture certificates, the double profit scheme of selling Native Americans, then collecting bounties for their recapture, the suspicious disappearances of those who might testify against him. When Cook attempted to flee, it was Awanada who brought him down, using the tracking skills of her people to predict which alley he would choose, positioning herself perfectly to trip him as he rounded the corner. Reed was there a moment later, his military training evident as he subdued the corrupt agent with efficient precision. 3 weeks later, they stood again before Judge Patterson, this time in his official courtroom. His ruling was unprecedented. Awanada was declared a free citizen with full rights of protection under territorial law. Furthermore, all certificates of indenture issued by Cook were invalidated, with those he had captured to be given choice of reservation placement or independent status. "The court further recognizes," the judge continued, his voice carrying clearly through the packed room, "the legal union between Reed Holston and Awanada, should they choose to formalize their partnership." The journey home took them past their farm, where they stopped to assess the damage from Cook's men. The house stood untouched, but their possessions had been scattered, the garden trampled. Yet spring was coming. Already, green shoots pushed through the disturbed soil of Awanada's medicinal plots, resilient despite the destruction. "We can rebuild," Reed said, surveying the farm that had once been his prison of grief and was now something else entirely, a beginning. Awanada knelt, gathering seeds from plants that had survived the winter and the raid. "Together," she agreed. When the ground warmed, they planted their fields, traditional crops alongside Awanada's native plants. The cradle, now completed, held seedlings they would transplant when the danger of frost passed, corn from reed stores and sacred herbs from Awanada's medicine pouch, growing together in temporary sanctuary. In a ceremony combining both their traditions, Apache blessing songs, and a simple gold band Emma had contributed, they committed to each other before a small gathering of supporters. Judge Patterson himself arrived to make their union legal, one of the first recognized interracial marriages in the territory. As spring yielded to summer, they began a new tradition. Each evening they taught local children, both settler and native, how to identify plants, how to read the weather in cloud patterns, how to plant seeds that would feed and heal. Their hands joined in the soil, creating something new from their separate losses, a home where the past was honored but didn't define the future. "I never thought I would find peace again," Reed confessed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from fields now lush with their combined knowledge. Awanada leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his with the ease of long practice. "Peace is not what we find," she replied, wisdom in her voice. "It is what we build, one day at a time." Above them, stars emerged in the deepening twilight, constant as grief, but beautiful as hope. Together, they watched darkness transform into its own kind of light. In the silence between words, in the space between two worlds, true connection is born. This tale reminds us that healing often comes through unexpected encounters, when we open ourselves to possibilities beyond our familiar boundaries. The courage to reach across difference, across culture, language, and experience, creates bridges where walls once stood. It is in our shared humanity, our parallel grief and joy, that we find common ground. The strongest bonds form not from dependence or ownership, but from choice, respect, and the daily decision to remain present despite the easier path of isolation. Each of us carries wounds, visible and hidden. Each of us stands at crossroads where safety and courage diverge. The harder path, the one requiring vulnerability and trust, leads to the richest harvests. Like seeds planted in disturbed soil, hope persists even after devastation. Like hands joining in common purpose, divided strength becomes something greater than its separate parts. The past need not define our future, though it shapes the wisdom we bring to new beginnings. Thank you for joining this journey across the American frontier, not just of land, but of heart. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below, subscribe for more historical tales, and follow our channel as we continue exploring the power of unlikely connections.